Hi, I'm Michael Gurr. I grew up in Hamilton, Ohio. Played football, baseball, a little bit of basketball during my high school days, and started getting some looks in football and transitioned most of my attention into that sport. Started out as a tight end and did very well at tight end, and actually caught the attention of Ohio State, and actually came in 1996 as a tight end. After about 2 years, transitioned from tight end to left guard, and had the opportunity to start for 2 years at left guard for the Buckeyes. Currently today, after graduation, decided that after injuries and such, decided to get into falling back onto my degree, got into the utility industry, where I still am working at in the industry today, working for City of Hamilton, where I'm working in our infrastructure department, and living today just outside of Hamilton.
Okay, now let me ask you a couple of things here. When you were growing up, you said you were playing multiple sports. Did you ever have the idea that this is going to become something, or is it just, I'm just a kid playing sports?
Well, I'd start playing ball, like back in the days when I was playing baseball, like T-ball age, and just I enjoyed sports. And slowly, I had a friend of mine ask if I'd ever played football because I was kind of a bigger kid as compared to all my other buddies.
Right.
So I started playing football at the age of 8, and I kind of fell in love with it. It was, a really interesting sport where I got to hit people, and
Right.
so it was one of those times where you were actually encouraged to hit people. And so, I actually did really well at it. And so and then as I got to be, older, got introduced to the weight room and got stronger, bigger, faster, and my football career started to take off. And being the bigger kid, and then just continuing to add more size from the weight room and get faster, it worked out well as playing tight end, because I could catch the ball and I could run through guys,
Run through them, run past them, right?
Run past them. It was a lot of fun. So we had some good teams back in high school. We had some older guys on my team that were getting nationally recruited. And while they were being recruited, I had, caught the eye of several recruiters as we were, playing, towards the state, playoffs and such. So it really kind of worked out in my favor. And then, the rest is history.
It's funny you say that your football gave you the opportunity to hit people. I was the kid that was running away from you guys. So, which was always fun. Like, I have a chance to run now. Woo! So
yeah.
Now in the Hamilton area, is that a Reds Bengals kind of following as you're growing up?
Typically, I mean, all I got to hear about as a kid was the Big Red Machine of the 70s. And so naturally I grew up loving the Reds. The Bengals, unfortunately, haven't always been the greatest team. It's a challenge to root for them year in, year out. But I was alive to see them make 2 Super Bowl runs in 1980-81 season, and then I think in the 88 season. Unfortunately, obviously, those games didn't pan out, the way I wanted them to. But still, nevertheless, needless to say, I'm still a hometown fan for both teams. And and then the other thing is especially in football, knowing that a lot of my buddies have played for so many different teams throughout the league, I became fans of them, watching them, not necessarily those teams.
And that's the beauty of Ohio State, is you can always find someone to root for, and you usually have that kind of connection like you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah. All right. Now, so the recruiting process, when does that first hit you that I'm being recruited by, people I see on TV?
I'd say probably the start of my junior year. I started getting a few letters here and there. And in our team, we used to travel to 7-on-7 tournaments in high school. And so, like I said, I had other guys on my team that were older that were getting a lot of exposure and attracting attention of colleges. So when we would go to the 7-on-7 tournaments, you'd have smaller universities it might be hosted by UC, where you'd have other coaches there and they would just kind of watch you, and then they'd pull you aside and talk to you a little bit, ask who you were and such. So it was one of those things where I always kind of thought that was a really interesting, and kind of fun, to talk to those coaches. Never at that moment thought that anything was going to come out of it.
Right.
And then after my junior year, I had a really good year my junior year. I started getting these handwritten letters by head coaches all across the country. And I'm thinking like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So from that moment on, I had several of my high school coaches start pulling me aside and saying, hey, this is for real for you. I mean, if you want this, the opportunity is there for you.
Okay. So at that point, are you thinking, if I have it, I mean, I know different parts of the state are different parts of the state. So are you more Ohio State leaning at that point? Or it's like, if Ohio State comes at me, I'm going? Or is it they've got to convince me to go to Ohio State?
Ohio State had always been a favorite, from my childhood days. Back when I was young, Carlos Snow, Greg Fry, both Cincinnati guys, were playing at Ohio State and doing well. And so I remember watching the guys play, at a very young age, and I always thought, wow, if I could ever play for the Buckeyes, it would be, a wonderful experience. Never dreamed that I would ever end up there, because it was beyond my wildest imagination to think that was ever going to come true.
Right.
But I also knew that football was going to be a vehicle for me, that even if it was to play at a smaller school, and help pay for my college, it would be great. And so I just continued to work hard and had, a lot of I was very blessed with success and size that, I used to my advantage, and was able to start attracting the attention of some of even the bigger schools. And so when I started my senior year, when coaches could start calling, I started getting calls from all of the big universities, including Ohio State. And then at that point, then I said, okay, this is the real deal. So I actually went to football camp at Ohio State, along with a few other of the bigger schools. And it was one of those where, where the coaches actually got to see you perform while you were in camp there and such.
Right.
So it created another, great experience and provided more understanding of kind of how this was all going to kind of transpire. So it was a wild, fun ride. A little nervous at times, how this was all going to kind of shake out, but it was great. I look back and I, wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm hearing. It's like, I didn't initially think that this was what was going to happen. I would have been happy to go, like I said, to UC or to someplace, Wright State or something, and then next thing you know, they're calling, and now I've got to make decisions. So you make the decision, or they make it for you. It seems like it's like Ohio State calls, I'm going, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry.
So I was at the point where Ohio State now is calling quite frequently. And I was in my senior year at this time, and Ohio State's in season. And so they started inviting me to come up to watch some of the games. And so I remember coming to a couple of them, and this was the 95, the Buckeyes played Notre Dame at home. And Terry Glenn had an incredible game. Yeah. Eddie George had an incredible game. It was just an amazing experience. And I remember Coach Cooper contacting me Sunday after the game that night. And he just said, look, what's it going to take to get you to come to Ohio State? I mean, this is the creme de la creme of schools. We want you to come play for us. And, you got the opportunity to see an amazing game, and that's what the experience is going to be like when you come here. And at that moment, I knew that he was right. I don't know who I was, kidding, thinking I needed to wait any longer. So I committed that night and said I would be there. So, yeah.
So you made that commitment, and is that like, okay, I'm a Buckeye now, or is it, okay, let me go to the next question, make it make sense. When you get on campus and it's move-in day freshman year, and the players are there before the rest of the university's there, now does it start to sink in that now I'm an Ohio State Buckeye, not just football player, but in the university itself?
It sank in pretty quickly because we had to report 3 days before all the other guys on campus, even before, the normal freshmen, that are not sports, affiliated. You have your freshman camp. And so we got on campus and, I was connecting with guys that I'd played the Ohio North-South game with and such. So it was it was fun to bring us all back together. And then we all kind of had that wide-eyed look of like, this is a real deal.
Yeah.
We are working out, we are the guys that are here right now, and the coaches are giving us full attention. So for those first 3 days, it was great. And then after that, then the upperclassmen came back, and the transition, shifted a little bit of the focus because, it was about getting the seniors, the juniors, and the starters, all prepped for the upcoming, season, and what freshmen would possibly be able to contribute and who would be kind of essentially put into more of a redshirt category. The experience was fun. It was also like I kind of got wow, like it was, these guys are incredible. I mean, amazing athletes who I was big where in a small town,
right?
But when I came to Ohio State, now I'm small guy competing against the best of the best, and so seeing guys or like Orlando Pace, who are 320 pounds and just incredible athletes, or, other guys like from Mike Vrabel or, Matt Finkus or Luke Fickle. These guys are just incredible. And so, I mean, it also kind of puts you back into a sense of like, can I really compete with these guys, pretty quickly because they're so much older than us.
Right.
So, I mean, it was my first year, needless to say, I was redshirted, and I had to, essentially get onto a better weight lifting program, get bigger, stronger, faster again. And, and it paid off in the long run. It just took a while.
So now you're in the middle of everything, and you're saying, okay, I'm a tight end. I've been a receiver all my life, and now you want me to play guard? I grew up with a rival school, Larry Cotterman. And Larry Cotterman was always the biggest kid in the area, but he was playing tight end. So he gets to Ohio State, and they move him to tackle. And this is maybe like 10 years before you. And we're going, how's that going to work out? But still he was the biggest kid in the area, but how's that going to work out? Worked out fine until he hurt his knee. But it's kind of the same thing. Now you're moving to a different position while you're there. How's that feel?
Well, it didn't transition immediately. When I first got to Ohio State, I was 260 pounds. I was a big tight end. Because when I came in, Ricky Dudley had just graduated, and Ricky Dudley was a first-round draft. He was the kind of the first protege hybrid type tight end that you think of today. This guy was able to run like a 4.5 40. So he was essentially a receiver that was in a tight end body. And so Ohio State had kind of an idea of what they wanted in a tight end. And I was more of that blocking type tight end, instead of a receiver at the size that I was. So the first thing that they did was, okay, Mike, you need to lose some weight. We're going to put you on a special diet. You're going to, you're going to run, you're going to lift, but you're also going to be restricted on what your calorie intakes or your type of food you eat. And so I went from like 260 down to about 230 pretty quickly, going through summer camp and all the running that we were doing. It's pretty intense. But I got in the best shape of my life. Well, as the year transitioned, I went from 230 and started quickly growing with all this, muscle that we were, from all the lifting we were doing. By the end of my first year, I was back up to 260, but my body fat composition, had significantly changed to where I was, less body fat and more, more muscle. And so I was then at that point, I was living on the Stairmaster. I was doing everything I can to try to keep my weight down so that I could stay at tight end. And my first 2 years, I stayed at tight end at Ohio State. But towards the latter part of my second year, I had several of the coaches, including the line coach, come talk to me. and say, Mike, you're fighting nature here. You are a big bodied guy who essentially is starving your body of food,
Right.
and you're running and you're doing everything you can to keep your weight down. And they commended me for what I was trying to do, but they also said, you're going to hate the rest of your time here because you're not enjoying this.
Right.
If you let nature take its course, you're going to grow into, more of an offensive interior guy. And we think that you may have a long-term career there. And so I started kind of transitioning, where I'd play tight end, but also move to play some guard, kind of back and forth throughout the week, just to kind of see how I would transition into it. By the end of my second year, I was about 280 pounds, and I was running great, best I'd ever run. I was really strong. So as a left guard, essentially you're typically backside, so you're doing a lot of pulling. Well,
Right.
I was as fast as a middle linebacker, but I outweighed them. So it was kind of like, this pretty easy. Now I'm the big kid again,
Right.
kind of going back into being able to bully guys around and they can't outrun me, So the transition over a little bit of time worked out, pretty well. And as the years rolled on, then I had made more of that full-time transition to just playing left guard and ended up starting with 2 years left guard.
Great. So we're getting to the point where now we're thinking, I'm secure in what I'm doing. I'm having a good time. I'm enjoying myself. I'm not starving myself. And those 2 years roll by pretty quick. Yeah. Okay. So now we're getting to the point where it's, unfortunately, you're looking at the end of the line. I mean, senior tackle, all that good fun stuff. What kind of memories does that bring back to you?
They're great memories. It never really dawned on me that it was all coming to an end until the end of my last game, which was, in the Outback Bowl against South Carolina. I had I was redshirt my first year, so I spent 5 years at Ohio State, and I was, at that time I was 22 years old roughly. And so I was at the point where, 5 years of, the greatest 5 years of my life. And I never really had given much thought, about my career, kind of coming to an end at Ohio State. It was, everything was focused on, okay, let's graduate. Let's, focus on, doing all the things that I need to do. Let's focus on playing the game, doing, the practice, whatever it is. I was always focused on what was immediately in front of me or what maybe a couple steps in front of me, but never really what was at the end of that process. And I just remember when I got done playing that game, obviously the game didn't work out. I ended up scoring. Ironically, I actually scored the only touchdown for Ohio State that game, which was kind of bizarre. One of my goals was to score a touchdown for Ohio State. I did it actually, just the last game, and it didn't work out in our favor. But
and not as a tight end, right?
And not as a tight end. And I remember going back to the locker room, and I sat down, and at that point it hit me, like, all the guys that I had spent, the last 5 years with, especially, those senior class, everything that I'd come to know about being a part of the great university, and competing for Ohio State, and everything that at that point was over. Like, it was, and that's when it hit me. And I just remember, like, being overwhelmed in emotion of, like, it was like, it's all been taken away now. And it hurt a lot. And, but I wouldn't trade it for the world because it was a great experience. And, it was one of those things where I wish I would have, looking back, I wish I would have maybe thought about it more leading up to it. But I was just one of those kind of task-oriented guys. I was so focused on the task at hand in front of me instead of what was the big picture at the end, what was going to happen.
Well, I think as fans, we, even though we say we live and die with you, and that means something to the fans, we see you guys come in and we know that it's important to you and all that, but we are able to turn the page because there's another group behind you.
Right.
And we're still cheering for the Ohio State University, even though we cheer for you individually. And like you said, guys go off here, go to Buffalo, go to San Diego or wherever, and we're still able to cheer for them. But we're able to go, we've got a new group of Buckeyes coming in, we don't understand sometimes that it doesn't feel that way to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still keep in contact with those guys, afterwards and such. And, and I even find myself, in the same boat of all the other millions of Ohio State fans throughout the world. I live and die, every Saturday with our Buckeyes. I'm part of the alum, and so, I enjoy it just the same as you guys, as far as the fact that, I can tune in and be connected on those Saturdays and such, and, and be frustrated when things don't necessarily go, every play versus as well as maybe even every game, but, it hurts just the same. It just, maybe I have a little bit more of a different experience because I
Right.
know firsthand, what those guys go through day in, day out.
Yeah. So now we've made our bones with where we're at. Now, how do you take that experience, the whole university experience, and then project that, and how does that affect what you do after that?
Well, I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in communications, and so after I got out of that, I wasn't necessarily sure what I wanted to do. I mean, the business world was something that interested me. Um, I kind of, wasn't sure exactly how or when or how I was going to do it. And so I ended up getting into doing some coaching when I was living in Columbus for Upper Arlington High School, and made some connections, and they ended up getting me into the utility industry and taught me a little bit about the business. From that point, then decided that I wanted to get into sales. And so I ended up working with another organization in Columbus that did sales toward services and products towards utility industry. And so I kind of really took off from that point, of staying in the industry and what I had learned and such. So where, the Ohio State connection in business has really helped me is the fact that I have a degree in communications. I enjoy talking with people. And I have something that, I can share an experience about that people a lot of times will relate to, whether they're an Ohio State fan or not. Most of them are football fans.
Right.
And so the moment that, I walk in, they're like, man, you're a big guy, even if I don't know them, kind of thing. And, I'm personable. I connect with them pretty well. And, and the next thing you know, we're talking sports, and we spend, an hour talking about sports and 10 minutes talking business. And, and it's one of those things where, okay, let's make this happen, kind of thing. And people, in that sense, people buy from people, and I can, it's one of those things where it helps me kind of, it's an icebreaker. It's one of those things where people entrust in me of, who I am, what I've done, and such, and they can relate to me. So it's worked out well. I got to the point where I had an opportunity to move home. And so now, like I said earlier, I'm working, for the city of Hamilton. We own our own utility and own utilities, gas, water, electric, and fiber optics. So doing everything that I'd done in operations before, sales before, I've kind of brought that home with me. And now I'm back home, where I grew up at, and loving every minute of it.
And isn't that amazing how you get to the point where I was worried so much about getting out of here and doing other things, and now I'm back home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life has a funny way of coming full circle on things.
Yeah. And you're thinking, this is cool, but wasn't the plan, but I'm glad that this was the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I appreciate you being on. This is going to be great for the people that are trying to figure out. I think the communication thing is fantastic. And what people learn is while you're in school, learn from everything that you do there, and the connections are going to be, it's amazing. As we were talking off the air, if you're any place and you yell OH, someone's going to yell IO back at you. And I love the way that works out. And your story just helps cement that for people. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.